will be here, you know? Well, let's see, realistically, probably 7. I would suspect. Assistance and manager. Please, it's a role.
I'm sorry. We love you. You fixed our road sign. You are on our top of our list. Don't try and, Andrew,
Yes.
don't try and sign in as a guest. Just do it like kidding.
Oh, no, I'm trying to log into my work email.
Oh, okay.
And it's not taking.
Hey, come over. Good to see you.
If I formally met you?
Probably not. No, we saw you and listened to you.
I know, that's kind of I'm trying to do well on the district engineer. So I
Nice
just
to meet you. Thank you.
wanted to make sure y'all had my contact information in case you need it.
I just talked to a constituent today, who talked to you yesterday, who was talking about sound
Sound
barriers.
walls.
Yes. And anyway, he was just so excited to talk to you about, if you had an opportunity where we can do stuff with money, thinking about that, I don't know.
Right.
It just feels like.
My real cell phone's on the back.
Your real cell phone, you have a fake one and a real one?
Yeah, I should do that too. The phone I was actually off.
Yeah, so when we get ready to do the study, it is a good chance to look in the
Oh, is that the training?
No, different. This is, I don't know, see any houses, but, and it's not this one, but next, there's I-25, and there's like a strip of land that feels like it's about this big. And they're putting 100 new houses.
that jurisdiction's right.
But also like, this is the very.
Wait, like,
North,
like
like
50?
70.
Oh.
I'm so confused.
Yeah, next week in winter there. So,
Why? Why radio? It wasn't Diamond's fault.
based on his issue.
Let's see, I need to see.
So if he hit us,
You're going to share today.
or that's
Oh,
not.
no.
Yeah, that's sort of what we call it, especially this one.
We don't have any action.
Mayor's, all of theirs are being submitted.
Me too, yeah.
And all that is, and then all that is manually entered by you.
And we need to have a vote.
All that for us to access that.
To allow commissioners to participate.
And also like, we could do so well. Like that. Like taking a paper.
We should be able to do that.
It does feel a little bit like,
And I think that's the stuff we'll hear in April when we come down and talk about some of the challenges. The mayor, a lot of times, they're supposed to go. So a lot of times they don't. So then we have to ask.
Cynthia.
Not even shut up and
No, she,
certain percentage
yes,
of any
she
word,
was,
like, no.
she got snatched up by the dark side.
Because they're not recording.
Gotcha, okay.
could be a lot of different concepts.
I worked in the town. I didn't know this.
Certificates are actually like super political and controversial, and so what is listed on there?
Yeah, well, actually,
Like undetermined or.
Right, or someone dies of a heart attack. That's why federally mandated that everything was this related to a tobacco incident because of the RICO lawsuit, and so they use that in their data collection. But prior to that, people would sort of obscure that smoking probably with it.
Like, that wasn't COVID.
It was right.
Like, you're like,
And it makes me think like when police are filling out, they're like, well, I don't want you to have your insurance go up, so I'll just put like undetermined to try to be nice, like, or like hiding, not hiding, but like they make sure it's suicide.
yeah, I don't know, that is something to suicide because that's very low. You don't have to do much of investigating. You're like, whoa. I don't really believe that he was murdered, but like, they super glossed over.
Oh, it is actually nearly 1 o'clock.
So it feels
Thank you,
very similar.
Madam Chair.
That's how I'm making a tangential, assumption anyway.
Yes,
Yeah.
she's not a new person, she's a public.
Anyway, yes, but good to see you.
Nice to meet you officially.
Hi, Manny.
Can you hear us?
But
Thank you.
maybe he's just going to handle it.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, he's
Hi, how are you?
I just wanted to make sure, so Caricia is an EIT, who's at the district. Are you okay if she sits up here with me so I can answer questions if she has?
Of course. Of
And I'll
course.
introduce her just so everybody knows
Did I
who
tell
she
you
is.
how
She's not a new person.
he was like,
I tried and she's
kind of
like,
like, you recognize it?
Why not? Good, how are you?
I'm great. You know, since I got my
Telephonic.
got it.
Is that the word I'm trying to say?
Got it. Via Zoom.
these people I haven't met until
That's where I'm
today.
going.
Yeah. No. But yeah, three out of 6 names. Yeah.
Hi, ladies, good afternoon.
How are you?
Good, thank you.
You're so far away.
I know.
Is that the idea?
Andrew.
Blame me, blame the governor.
You are the government.
No, I'm not. I said the governor, not the governor.
But he's running for governor, I heard.
I am? That's news to me. My fundraising is going to be very, very far behind.
Like 47 people running for governor for that last count. I figured you'd have.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. I didn't know there were 47. Welcome. Oh, welcome to the Mesilla Valley Metropolitan Planning Organization. Today is Wednesday, February 9th, and it is 1:01 p.m. Before we proceed with the agenda, I need a motion and a second so that we can allow Commissioner Sanchez, the chair, to participate via Zoom.
So moved. Second, Graham.
All right, thank you. Vote?
Yes, Madam Chair. Councilor Corin,
Yes.
Councilor Graham,
Yes.
Councilor Bencomo,
Yes.
Mr. Doolittle?
Yes.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Commissioner Sanchez?
Yes.
Vote in favor of yourself there. Madam Chair, the motion passes.
All right. Can we get a roll call vote to determine quorum?
We kind of de facto did that already, Madam Chair.
did?
We do
Okay,
have quorum.
Thank you. Guide me on this. It's been a couple of years.
It's only been 2.
Okay. All right. If I can ask everyone to please stand, and as we recite the Pledge of Allegiance, please join me. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. And actually, I'd like to kind of veer from the agenda real quickly so that I can ask Trent to introduce his guest this afternoon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Caricia Munoz, who is an engineer in training with the department, is currently going through her district operations. So she's been, just started a couple weeks ago with us. So she's kind of following me and some of my staff around. So if the board's okay with it, I asked her to sit up here with me so that if she has any questions as we're going through the process, I can explain and answer at that time rather than doing it after. So if that's okay with you, Madam Chair, this is Caricia, and I hope you're all okay with her sitting up here.
Absolutely. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Okay. Does anyone have a conflict of interest or perceived conflict of interest with today's agenda?
No.
Okay. Seeing none. Okay. Hearing none from Commissioner Sanchez. Do we have any public comment this afternoon? Okay. Seeing none, may I get a motion for the approval of the agenda?
Move to approve.
Thank you. And a second?
Second. Corin.
Thank you. Roll call?
Yes, Madam Chair. Councilor Corrin?
Yes.
Councilor Graham?
Yes.
Councilor Bencomo?
Yes.
Mr. Doolittle?
Yes.
Commissioner Sanchez?
Yes.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Madam Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you. And may I get a motion for approval of the minutes?
Move to approve.
Thank you. And a
Second.
second? Thank you. Roll call?
Yes, Madam Chair. Councilor Corrin?
Yes.
Councilor Graham?
Yes.
Councilor Bencomo?
Yes.
Mr. Doolittle?
Yes.
Commissioner Sanchez?
Yes.
Madam Chair? Madam Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you. All right, moving on to discussion items. The first discussion item, 7.1, the 2022 Annual Safety Report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Andrew Ray for MPO staff. I would like to introduce Dr. Michael McAdams, who will be giving this presentation.
Good afternoon, Policy Board. The first time I said it since we made the change. And today I'd like to talk about the Mesilla Valley MPO 2022 Annual Safety Report. Now, a road or a street that has no cars or bicyclists or pedestrians has no crashes, does it? And let me explain. You have to go from ground zero and explain up from there too. On a street or road, there is complex issues or complexity emerging from all drivers and motorized vehicles interacting on the roadway with bicycles and pedestrians in a multiple actions. In an automobile-oriented environment, pedestrians and bicycles are vulnerable due to the speed of the vehicles, the size, which is getting more and more. They strike you not here they strike on the chest, not at your waist. And so for many, that can be instant death. And so the size of the vehicles, which seem to be increasing, and lighting too. And we'll see this when I go to the data. Crashes are directly related to the consequence or the externalities of the freedom of owning a car. And with anything, there's good and bad. Both crashes and their elimination are a reduction of wicked problems, meaning that the problems are wicked, that they're very complex, almost unsolvable sometimes, and the solutions are also wicked as well, and that you may cause another problem by solving a problem. So I think these are good things to remember. We are unfortunately, like the state, is increasing in fatalities over the years. And we'll dive down a little bit deeper later on that. And here you see the cause, overwhelming, is drug and alcohol abuse. There are too many pedestrians. They account for almost 42% of all fatalities. And then you add up all the percentages for dark, not lighted, dark lighted, and dusk or dawn, you'll find that a great majority of crashes occur during these hours. Now you see this really plain when we look at the graph. The drug and alcohol abuse completely overwhelms other categories for fatalities. Serious injuries have been going down just in the state and the nation, and you can attribute that to seat belts, airbags, better equipped vehicles, et cetera, automatic braking, et cetera. But there's probably still too many, but much more than fatalities. If you look at serious injuries, again, what pops up on top are two things, are alcohol and drug abuse and distracted driving. Serious injuries, you see there right, again, you have two that are top contenders. Alcohol and drug abuse, of course, is number one, and followed by driver inattention, which could be attributed to cell phones as well. Non-motor fatalities and serious injuries you see it's very erratic, but basically they're still increasing. You get a moving average. But at least they're not, but the thing is we could have 0 1 year and 6 or 7 the next year. So it's very hard to tell exactly what the coming years will be. If you have the cause of crashes, these are all the crashes. Driver inattention rises to number 1, and failure to yield number 2. If you look at drug and alcohol abuse, they're not responsible for total crashes, but they are important for fatalities. Now, some of these are regular players, the intersections. You notice that Telshore and Loman comes on top, followed by Travis and Maine, then Loman and Walton, and Spruce and Travis. And you can go down, and that's in the report too as well. Here you look at, and this shows very plainly where they are located too. Excuse me. You notice that a lot of them are clumped around from Walton or Walnut to Foothills. And that's so you combine them, we'll see later when we combine the quarter, that comes very clearly. And also Spruce with me before. And there was a cluster on El Paseo, you know, and some around University. And of course, the major crash rate at really 2 locations. That's the Baton Memorial and also at Elks and Travis and North Main. Now, crash by quarter, this is not by rate, but you look at this, and some of the regular characters show up. Telshore, Loman, and also, I think, way down El Paseo as well. Those are in the report as well, but the regular characters. Where you can really see it is in the map. You can see that Telshore comes bright red. North Main, all the way from 3 Cross, really all in North Main, is a high crash corridor. Then, of course, El Paseo and University. These are not surprising because of traffic area as well, but some of them may be a geometric center. Pedestrian crashes, there's not such a pattern because there's a number of pedestrian crashes on Telshore. There are some along near Picacho in that area, some on North Main above Picacho, or not North Main, Valley above Picacho, and others concentrated in the University area. Bicycle crash have a little bit different pattern. You see a cluster around Picacho. There used to be one Amador, but there's one fatality on Motel, and then cluster around in the lower portion, probably near the university, because there are a lot of bicyclists in the university area. But again, this pattern changes from year to year, but some things keep on popping up. I would say the Amador from going west pops up all the time. Picacho pops up all the time, bicycles and pedestrians. University always, and then other corridors come and go. And it's really important to look at the long term. Drug and alcohol abuse is the primary cause of fatal crashes. Driver attendance, presumably related to cell phones use while driving, is the chief cause of all crashes. Pedestrian fatalities represent almost 42% of all fatalities. We have a distinction in New Mexico being the state with the highest fatalities per capita. Hope that changes. And we're unfortunately receiving undue attention for that too as well. A significant pedestrian crash occur at night, and that could be dark lighted and dark unlighted as well. The intersection we deserve further studies are Loman and Chell Shore, Travis Elks in North Main, El Paseo and Bouts, and Loman and Walton. Corridors which are awarded or more for study are Chell Shore, Loman to Northrise, El Paseo, North Main to University, East Loman, Solano to Foothills, and North Main, Solano to I-25, and of course, East University Avenue. Now, crashes occur for multiple reasons. They can be structurally, which structural mean like alcohol abuse, driver intention, which is hard to deal on a local level and probably going to be dealt on the state or national level to decrease that. Things like drunk driving, driving under influence of drugs, and driver inattention. Although separating the sport, the structural and geometric crash are intertwined. They may be both combined, and both must be addressed to reduce the number and severity of crashes for the MPO area. Lighting intersection and corridors appear to be a major factor in both pedestrian and bicycle crashes. It should be noticed a lot of times pedestrian crashes occur not at intersections, but along corridors. And some of it's due to educating pedestrians how to wear protective things you can see, but also many pedestrians are afraid to cross the intersections because the intersection is more daunting than crossing in mid-block. And bicycle crashes they're sporadic, and that's why I say the patterns change from year to year, but there's always usual culprits too. Lack of suitable separation, like we're doing now with the bicycle trails, they're separated. That's hopefully going to lead to less crashes, bicycle crashes. Speed, we know that anything above 35, the injury rates get more and more of bicycle pedestrians. Below 35, they become less. The ideal speed like 12 miles. And protection at intersections, like we also mentioned at Loman and Walton in an earlier presentation, are contributing factors to this vulnerable population. And most all vulnerable, many people that ride bicycles do it not by choice because income. So many bicycles and pedestrians are hit are not your recreational but professional bicycle, usually low income. There is not one solution to decrease crashes in the planning area. That's a real tough thing. And jurisdiction of the planning area must contribute to strive to reduce crashes, even though it looks like a hard thing to do and sometimes quixotic. But there's a fair divide the complexity and the nature of the crashes. And I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Dr. McAdams, very much.
Thank you.
It's informative as always. Wow. Questions? Yes, please.
I have a question I have actually two questions. One is 3 slides prior, you mentioned 2 areas or 2 sort of types of further study. Sorry, the next one.
This one, for which one?
Further study versus warranted study. What is the difference between these two?
I just
Sure.
use, they're just, I just send
Oh,
them.
okay.
I use this where I wouldn't say further study.
Okay,
I'm using a very generic term,
okay.
so instead of change the language around.
I ask in part because I've been hearing a lot about warranted kind of.
Warrants are different for, say, intersections, for, say, signals, and for, say, hawk signal. Warrants, I mean, do you have enough pedestrian traffic, et cetera, crashes? That warrant is different from the warrant. I'm saying needed in the warrant in that, not in the strict traffic engineering term.
I got you. Thank you. That's super helpful. And then the second thing that I just wanted, and this is, again, I come to this naively. This is only my second meeting, so forgive me all for probably bringing up something that's been talked about a lot. But I understand the designations of arterials, minor and major, and all of those kinds of things that are related to DOT things. But speed being a primary element in these crashes, is speed immutable? That is, are there places where we can change the speed limit?
That's a very hard thing to
Systematically.
do. Just posting the speed limit doesn't necessarily mean you're going to reduce speeding. It's really a combination of enforcement to a certain degree, and also making roads so that you can't speed. Curves, the most drastic thing is speed tables or speed bumps. But really, it's the design of the road. People will drive, there's a design speed. So interstates are built usually for 100 miles an hour, where they can transport missiles. But some roads they have a higher design speed for emergency vehicles. So you know that people will drive those speeds. And with a situation with COVID, with less traffic, and traffic is also a condition, that will slow down speed as well. So with no traffic, little traffic, people were speeding, and I think there still are. So it's really a combination of design of the roadway, say, and enforcement to get speeds down. And also education. People need to know that, I think that ultimately it's the responsibility of them to reduce crashes. People get in the cars, you know, sometimes they feel like they're in a metal compartment. They road rage, et cetera, but they also don't realize the consequences to themselves and their families. So I think that's one thing that educators say. It's really down to the individual a lot of times. Some of it's not. Before you get in the car, you know, you should be aware if you've been drinking, your blood alcohol content. You should be aware that your actions may harm you and other people too. So I think that's a hard thing to grasp, because people get in the cars and they think that they're in another world, I think. So it's not an easy question, but it's a good question. Thank you.
No, I want to just put this in the context of both having Elks and Trevice, or that area in my thing, but also I live, my house backs up onto the new Roadrunner addition where there's already been a fatality. The road design definitely isn't conducive to slowing folks down, and I think that the speed limit there's some speed limit ambiguity there that leaves room for things like fatalities to occur. But it was completed after this study actually was was done, so I expect to see it on the list next time in 3 years. I anticipate seeing my road there.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Madam Chair, Councilor Corrin, just to further clarify, the final two bullet points, the distinction between them is the first bullet point is talking about intersections, and the second one is talking about corridors. So that's why the distinction, that's the break there.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Counselor. Yes.
Thank you so much for this, Dr. McAdams. Really, really interesting. I think I always look at this through the lens of a cyclist before I look at it as the lens of a driver. And whereas most of my biking is done on trails or off-road, I still feel really sensitive to these kind of issues. And I was interested when you said that a lot of the serious cyclist-involved crashes were maybe were kind of trending more toward lower income folks who maybe didn't have the visibility gear they needed or lights, and coming at this as a potential community member and policymaker. Can you speak to that a little bit more as we're trying to explore ways to make, non-motorized, travel safer and more equitable?
Madam Chair, Councilor Graham, this, anecdotally, we don't get age, but we know from experience that many of the people that are using bicyclists and pedestrians are low-income people, because they don't even have enough money to buy a bus token too, or maybe not aware. There is programs for for the community hope. There was through organization, nonprofits, give people bicycle lights, et cetera. I'm not sure where that's coming from. I think that's one element that could be explored further, to talk to places like Community Hope, the Gospel Rection Music, and give them, vests that are bright colored vests. I see many homeless people that do have vests. Somehow they've been educated, I'm not sure, maybe through some organization, and give them good bicycles or repaired bicycles, and give them an idea of the consequences, I think. But we realize that many in low income also have, and homeless have, mental problems as well, mental challenges, and cognitive challenges. So I think that they don't think a lot of times, and they may be on alcohol and drugs as well. This is one thing. Many of the pedestrians and bicycle crashes have been because the person that got hit were on alcohol or drugs, and sometimes the person that hit them as well. So it's sometimes geometric stuff just doesn't cut it. It would help, I think, longer time for pedestrian lights, particularly for those that are physically challenged, like along Walton, would help. Because I have some associates or some fellow transit riders who say that they're really frightened to walk across some of these roads to get to bus stops. So this is to give them a little more walking time, make the bus stops more prominent, or the crosswalks more prominent, and make bike lanes too, and keep the trucks and other garbage off of bike lanes too. So it's really an incremental thing. It's little steps, and it's looking at how effective these little steps are. So it's not like one covers all, but I think that the unfortunate thing is that crashes will occur no matter what we do because of multiple factors. And we can't prevent people from making bad judgments, particularly when they're crossing streets. We can't help it. So unfortunately, our goal was to get 0 crashes, 0 fatalities, 0 serious injuries, but the unfortunate thing, they're going to keep on happening, and we want to make them less, I think.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Counselor.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Thank you.
Counselor.
Thank you so much for this presentation. Again, of course, continue to be frustrated that it's been 2019, right? But we won't belabor that, as we all are frustrated. And I appreciate both of your questions. Thank you. I think you're right. I mean, there are things that are out of our control, right? Like, people will make bad driving decisions every single day, and there's things that are just out of control. However, when you show us a map of areas there's clear patterns, right, that tells me that that is potentially on us. And so I'm curious, in terms of the 2 last bullet points here, how do we move forward with this? What are the next steps for us in order to ensure that we are studying these specific areas that you've, clearly said these are problematic, so that we can, invest in ways to mitigate injury and crashes more effectively? How do we make this happen? How do we move forward with these studies?
Madam Chair, sorry, Michael. This is a kind of a politically delicate question, actually, so I'll take the heat rather than putting it on Dr. McAdams.
He can handle it.
As counselors and commissioners and trustees, you need to go back to your jurisdictions and mandate that these things be done. The MPO is advisory to our member jurisdictions. We don't implement. We can't make any of these things happen. Unfortunately, Councilor Bencoma was the only one who's going to remember. Actually, you weren't even there that day, but I did give a presentation to City Council in June of last year on this topic, following up from the 2021 annual safety report. However, that process internally, it did, within the city, there were some conversations held, but it didn't really end up pushing anything forward. So it's ultimately, I guess I'll use the word the onus, because that's the word that came to mind. When you take off your MPO hat and put on your, I'm a member of this governing board for this municipality or county, that's when you need to remember in that hat what you remember when you have your MPO hat on. So that's basically the quickest and bluntest answer to the question is you've got to take the knowledge that you gain here and implement it with the implementing agencies that actually have control,
You
which
know,
the
Andrew,
MPO is not.
I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you saying that. Thank you. I think that's exactly what I needed to hear. And yes, I asked for that work session last year, but then had to go pick up my wedding dress, so I missed it. My apologies. But I'm glad we're having this conversation, and I'll certainly be bringing this up with our city manager, Peely, and also at, hopefully with my colleagues at council comments to naming these intersections and roadways specifically, because I needed that little bit of reminder that that's on us. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Madam Chair, can I add to this?
Yes,
Councilor Bencoma. To do intersection studies for crashes is not an easy task. To do the ones I presented took a lot of effort. We had to request special detailed crash reports for this. And to compile them takes weeks, sometimes do. And one thing is that we hope that in the new bill for the infrastructure bill, there's more money for safety. Right now, one thing we have is the highway safety funds from the national government is tied up. And that's really, there needs to be major infusion of cash to do safety studies, and probably done by a specialist that knows about crashes, that has to analyze crashes, and to give appropriate recommendations to.
okay.
So there's usually, when you look at the direction of cars, et cetera, you can see where maybe there's recommendations, but it also depends on whether the implementing agency wants to follow those recommendations too.
You know, the Complete Streets Ordinance is about to come to council in a couple weeks, and I know one of the recommendations in that is to create some sort of task force or committee to continue reviewing all of that. And, you know, we're going to suggest that come to the Transportation Sustainability and Infrastructure PRC. So perhaps Andrew and Dr. McAdams, we can get you on, Madam Chair, for the committee sitting right over there, get you on the agenda so we can have this conversation. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Councilor, could I speak with you off after the meeting in more detail about that, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Yes, Mr. Doolittle?
Madam Chair, so I just want to give an update on at least one corridor that the department has responsibility for. So the North Main from Solana to I-25. The department actually already has a project in the STIP for fiscal year 2023 to address, really the main focus was to remove and replace the bridge, that old structure that's right there by the Jiffy Lube, because it's too narrow, it's old, it doesn't allow pedestrian crossing. But as part of that project, we actually studied the entire corridor from Spitz 3 crosses to I-25. I just met with city staff this morning to talk about, they're going to pursue possibly some grant money through the new federal infrastructure bill to address improvements at the Travis-Elks intersection itself. Because originally our study that we did internally showed that the flow on US 70 is adequate. The problems were local traffic coming off of Elks and Travis. So we've been discussing for probably 2 years now with city staff that there needs to be some financial commitment from the city to improve that intersection. With the opportunity through grants, I think we're at that point. But we have in the STIP already the project that will go from basically where the Spitz 3 crosses project ended up to up to Travis, to widen it to 3 lanes, to do some access control. Because right now, it's a free-for-all, honestly, with that open median. So we're going to do some access control. If we can get some sort of push from city staff on this grant, we may be able to add the improvements at that intersection to our project. But just so you all know, we are moving forward. We have been for a couple years on that entire corridor. And I was very pleased with the discussion we had with city staff this morning. I think we have a very good opportunity to partner and get a fairly substantial grant award through the infrastructure bill. So at least that one has already been studied. We've already got preliminary design. We actually have drawings and plans preliminary drawn up for the intersection at Treviso and Elks. So we're moving forward on that one. The rest is City of Las Cruces. I like throwing you guys under the bus so I don't take all the heat. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, no, that's great news. Thank you for that update. That is a nightmare in that section, yeah. Commissioner Sanchez, do you have any questions or comments?
No, Madam Chair, I appreciate the questions that were asked here by my fellow policy board members. I think, however, I appreciate particularly Andrew kind of hitting on that point as well as Councilor Bencomo just provided that sentiment, which is that I think it's important that for all of us on the policy board, ensure that we or understand that things that we discuss here not only are here to educate us within our own positions, but it's our ability to go back into our own bodies and try to drive some of these changes where we feel we need to make these, wherever we need to make within our own jurisdiction. So I appreciate that. But no, I'm good right now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. And yes, thank you, councilors. And yes, Trent.
Madam Chair, one more comment that I forgot to add. Councilor Curran was asking about, made the comment about speed. And I think Dr. McAdams really touched on it. So with us as a department, we actually have state statute that governs how we address speed modifications. We can't just simply go take down a sign and put up a new one. So we go through a full-blown study. It does allow for some engineering analysis and engineering judgment. But one of the things we've experienced in the requests that we honestly frequently get is just reduce the speed. You'll reduce the severity. But then what happens if you get people driving too fast, then you get speed differential accidents where people are rear-ending rather than, it creates another accident type. So I don't know what the city requirements are for changing speed, but at least internally, we have to do a study. It's required by state statute. But I certainly appreciate your comment. A lot of times that is the solution, but it does take a while. You got to do the traffic counts, the studies, the speed, those kinds of things. But, certainly a good observation for us to look at.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilor.
Mr. Doolittle, yeah, the city process is, there's several steps. There's an acronym for it that I always forget, but there are several steps before we get to the place where we're suggesting speed bumps, which is always what also people want, right? Which causes a bunch of other potential consequences. But there is a pretty lengthy process, including some sort of traffic study before the city makes a decision on changing any of those things.
Thank you. Okay. No other questions, comments? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. McAdams, again. All right. 7.2, safety data discussion update. Andrew.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Andrew Ray for the record. The policy board will no doubt remember at last month's meeting, there was a directive given by the board to MPO staff to have a resolution on today's agenda to the state and other parties to be determined regarding the tardiness of getting the safety data from the state, the two-year lag time. Everyone has obviously noticed that there's no resolution to that effect on today's agenda, and I'm here to offer an explanation as to why. We have had a number of conversations facilitated by Mr. Doolittle with Mr. Franklin Garcia. Is it Dr. Franklin Garcia or it's Mr. Franklin Garcia at the state? The state made a request to the MPO staff and Chair Sanchez to wait on doing a resolution until they had an opportunity to give a presentation to this very board on the topic in detail. So Commissioner Sanchez consented to that request. We were working towards trying to get the state here today. However, the legislature is still in session. And the DOT staff just can't get away from Santa Fe to be able to be here in person. And the current interpretation of the Open Meetings Act by the City of Las Cruces, who is the legal agent, so they are our attorney. The current interpretation by the City of Las Cruces is that hybrid meeting format, which we're in a way indulging in today because of Commissioner Sanchez's situation, but hybrid meeting format is not allowed by the City of Las Cruces. And specifically to our situation, you can't have a hybrid presentation. You can't have somebody do a virtual presentation to our board meeting. So we were not able to make connections to get the state staff here today. We have them on the schedule to be here in person to give that presentation at the April 9th policy board meeting. Just to give a little bit of a flavor of the conversations that have been had, and I will also turn it over to Mr. Doolittle for more of the state perspective. There are a number of issues, some of which we had already discussed last month, some that I hadn't thought about so much as far as dealing with improving the timeliness of the reports. But the one that I am specifically going to highlight here that was a little bit eye-opening to me because I didn't think this was the case anymore. But Mr. Garcia said that there are still a large number of law enforcement agencies within the state of New Mexico who are not on the TRACS system. I know some of you may not be a familiar acronym, but that's basically a statewide crash reporting database. And that, according to Mr. Garcia, is a big part of why the delay exists, is because they're still having to go through paper reports. Based on my work back in 2019, those of you who are here will remember that I did go on a little bit of an expedition trying to get some improvement in this area from the state already. I was under the impression from the information I got in 2019 that was not the case, that most of the jurisdictions in the state were on tracks. So this was new information to me that kind of stood out as like, well, okay, perhaps this is a legislative opportunity where some funding could be set aside with a mandate that here's some money, all of you smaller municipalities in the state of New Mexico, get yourselves hooked up with tracks. I don't know, that's just personal editorializing. But that's one of the things that stood out to me as being one of the major hurdles, according to what Mr. Garcia said, that's standing between us and being able to get a bit more of a timely response on the data. But I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Doolittle, as he's got the internal DOT perspective, and he was also part of these conversations.
Thank you, Andrew.
Madam Chair, I'll abstain. No, I'm just kidding. I think Andrew really hit the nail on the head when it comes to what Franklin submitted to us. The other thing that he mentioned to me on a separate discussion is even some of the track reports, they don't include a lot of the data. So for instance, they don't have a reason for the crash, they're missing data, those kinds of things. So even when they're being submitted electronically, UNM is having to go through those very meticulously and make sure all the data is included, make sure things are accurate so that the data that we get is reflective of what's going on. So I think the first step is making sure that everybody is timely reporting them, because I think that'll help UNM's timeline and review. But they're gonna have to be accurate. There's gotta be some sort of quality control process when it goes through our law enforcement partners. But I think there's some steps that we can certainly make. I'm kind of curious to see what the presentation's gonna hold, because this is new to me as well. It's just kind of become an accepted standard to us as a district that it's gonna be 2 years out. Just yesterday, I sat on an asset management executive committee through the department where we use nothing but data. And it's not just traffic data, it's pavement condition, it's bridge condition. We are starting to move forward with quicker turnaround of all of our data, but this is one that I have no hindsight, it's just an accepted process and timeline. So I'm just as curious for the presentation as you all are.
Thank you.
And Madam Chair, I don't really have anything more on the topic to present on today. So if anybody has any questions on this item.
Okay. Questions, comments?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Commissioner, yes.
Thank you. And I just wanted to also, provide some perspective, was that along with everything that Andrew and Trent had just mentioned, One of the things that as we were finding out and discussing was that because of kind of the complexity of the way this data is reported, I wanted to make sure that we were going to be with a resolution that was going to be coming before the policy board. We had the right, or going in the right direction in terms of the people that we were going to be directing it to. And I felt that's kind of where I wanted to have this presentation so that we could have discussion and ensure that we all agreed that we would be most effective in passing a resolution of this nature and seeing how we can work to kind of push the state, if we can, in that direction, so that we can get hopefully achieve the goal that we were looking for. But that was part of the issue. And then with our policy board not meeting in March, unfortunately, that means the earliest we will probably be having this presentation or this discussion again will be in April. But I just wanted to at least provide some context as to kind of where we're going. And I didn't want to just abandon this, but I want to make sure that we're going about this in the most prudent way.
Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate that. Questions, comments? Okay.
Madam Chair, before I move on to the next item, I actually just remembered one other thing that's germane to this topic. I did speak with an MDOT planning staff vis-a-vis the ability of staff to have any kind of conversational relationship directly with state legislators. That was a topic of consideration at last month's meeting. And as I suspected, we are not. So anything that would be a direct interface with the New Mexico State Legislature, MPO staff, other than doing a document submission probably via the Las Cruces City Clerk's office is probably mechanically how that would happen. We would not be allowed to have any kind of engagement or relationship with that. So just one last piece of information for the board.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew. All right, 7.3, MPO bylaws update.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We'll go ahead and wait for, there we go. As everyone is aware, we do have a new joint powers agreement that is in force for the Mesilla Valley MPO. With this significant accomplishment, I will call it, the new top administrative priority for this MPO is now moving on to updating the current MPO bylaws. There are a number of areas in which our current bylaws are now desperately in need of updating. Obviously, the top one is updating the language in the bylaws to reflect the new JPA. We've also got inconsistent provisions between how each one of the MPO member committees is handled that we would like to take a look at, kind of get those straightened out. We would also like to clarify the responsibilities of each one of the committees and the expectations on MPO committee members. And I also, just a point of clarification, in this presentation, I'm going to be saying MPO committees kind of generically. That should be interpreted to include the policy board. It's just easier to say committees rather than board and committee, so please forgive me for that. And we also, and this is something that is going to become more of a point of emphasis as we move through this decade. So I guess kind of starting now, this MPO does need to become, I don't want to say more forward thinking, but in a way, I guess that's what I mean. But not that we haven't been in the past, but specifically with regard to the future of this MPO. This MPO is going to have to start doing more future planning, more future proofing for what this MPO may turn into if it becomes a large MPO, a TMA, which may happen at the next census. We need to start laying the foundational work now, and we're going to be doing that through these bylaws, I hope, to start moving us in the direction of where we would need to go if at the 2030 census we do cross over that threshold, because it's going to be a very different world if we do go over that. However, all that being said, my intent in today's presentation is not to go into any of the content of the bylaws itself. What we need to do today is we need to build a consensus on the part of the policy board about how the board wishes to handle and address the process of the bylaws revision itself before we worry about the content. We did meet with Chair Sanchez, and we went over a pretty large range of alternative means to accomplish the revision. With his consent, we narrowed those down that we're going to present to the board today down considerably. However, that does not necessarily mean that please do not interpret these options that I'm about to present as being all-inclusive or exclusive. If there are ideas that the board has that they wish to bring forward in this conversation here and now today, please do so. These alternatives that I'm presenting, we did vet them through the chair, but they are intended to be a starting point of the conversation. We think a good starting point, but still, if there are further ideas, further conversation points, please don't hesitate to add them into the dialogue today. So, with that long preamble out of the way, historically, the bylaws changes have been done via an internal staff process for the Mesilla Valley MPO, at least every single time the bylaws have been revised during the time that I have been here. It's always been just an internal process where staff rewrites them ourselves and then does a consultation with each one of the committees and then brings it to what at that time was the policy committee for final approval. That is still on the table for this process if that is how the board decides that it wants to handle this. It does have the advantage of logistically and from a speed standpoint, this would definitely be the easiest to do. However, it has the difficulty of there would functionally be very little coordination and consensus between the policy board and the two advisory committees through this process. And we have already discussed with Mr. Chair some of the changes that staff has in mind. And while I'm not meaning to be over dramatic, they are rather significant. So my editorial opinion would be I would prefer not to see this as the preferred option, even though it does have the advantage of speed. But that's going to be up to the board to determine. The next option that we're going to present today, we're calling the Subcommittee of Chairs, or 1-1-1. That would be basically the chair of the policy board, the chair of the TAC, and the chair of the BPAC would work with MPO staff and be the subcommittee to rewrite and look at the bylaws. That one also does have the advantage of speed, would be relatively quick and easy logistically, comparatively speaking. However, it would bring a very limited perspective from each one of the boards, or the board and committees, and would also leave some of the member jurisdictions of the MPO out of the process entirely. Next, what we're calling the Subcommittee of Chairs and Vice Chairs, or 2-2-2. This also maintains relatively light logistical requirements and would bring more perspectives into the composition process. But again, same as 1-1-1, there would still be some jurisdictions that would be left out of the composition process entirely. Then the Subcommittee of Jurisdictions, as we're calling it, or 3-3-3. This would bring all of the political jurisdictions directly into the composition process, but unfortunately, it would leave significant entities such as NMDOT out of the process. And also at 9, this is the point at which staff, from a logistical standpoint, is beginning to get uncomfortable with the number of people that would have to be involved in the scheduling and bringing everybody together. So the next one is the one that has a very long name, but I'll just refer to it as 4-2-2. This would bring from the policy board a representative from each one of the political jurisdictions plus an MDOT from the board, and then would bring the chair and vice chair from each one of the advisory committees onto the subcommittee. I will say this is the preferred option of MPO staff. This is on the larger end from a size standpoint, but we believe it's still reasonably manageable and has the most balanced perspective. Although unfortunately, given the nature of the composition of our advisory committees, it's not going to be possible to bring all of the perspectives to the table in any kind of sort of functional subcommittee group. There's always going to still be some people that would be left out of the direct composition process. For consideration and in an attempt to address that, there's also 4-3-3, which would then be the same composition from the policy board, but then 3 representatives from the TAC, presumed to include the chair and vice chair, and then 1, I guess we'll call him at-large member, and then same thing from the BPAC, the chair and vice chair of the BPAC, and an at-large member of the BPAC. Staff is a little uncomfortable. This one is at 10 members. That one is the largest one that we are specifically proposing here in this presentation today. I'm not confident that we would be able to consistently get consistent attendance at subcommittee meetings with a committee of that size, but that would bring a more balanced representation of perspectives into the composition process. And then to kind of render this process a little bit more digestible, and I will come back to this slide when we are reach the discussion phase of this, but here's a table basically of the information I just outlined of the various alternatives plus the pros and the cons of each alternative. If the board determines that it wishes to utilize a subcommittee, we will need a specific action. We will need a resolution by the board to designate that subcommittee. We would bring that before this board in April for action. During that time between now and then, we would reach out to prospective members to ensure their availability. I'm specifically thinking of the advisory committee representatives to ensure that they would be able to serve, because we are going to have to specifically designate individuals in the resolution. Same thing that we did with the JPA subcommittee. When that was designated 2 years ago, we had to designate by name the individuals who were to participate. Once the subcommittee has met and done its work, our intention is to then present the draft that is developed to each one of the MPO committees, in turn the BPAC, the TAC, and then the policy board, to collect any additional comments or suggestions, feedback from the entirety of each one of those committees before then bringing it through the MPO committee process for final recommendation by the BPAC and the TAC, and then adoption by the policy board. And those are the options that we were going to, that the chair requested I specifically present to you today. Again, if there are further ideas, by all means, please share those. And I will go ahead and move the PowerPoint back to the previous slide that has the options breakdown.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Commissioner and Chair Sanchez, for all your work with Andrew on this and getting us this far. I'll open it up to the board to questions, comments.
Madam
Mr.
Chair,
Doolittle?
I have a question or two, maybe, depending on where it goes. I'm leaning towards the 4, 2, and 2. I like that idea. I think all are represented. I just have another question related to the process. Is if we have representatives from the subcommittees, and they're the ones who are moving the language along, don't we think that it might open up some additional issues if we then present that to the subcommittees? I mean, if we're worried about committee size and input, if you have any of these that do it and then you open it up, for instance, to one of the other ones that has 11 members, it seems to me we've just kind of digressed from what the subcommittee has, or what the committee has put together, to now allowing 11, 15, 20, whatever those members are. Why? And I don't want to take away from their opportunity to provide input, but shouldn't they as a committee provide it to the chair, who then brings that to the committee rather than the other way around? Just my thoughts.
Madam Chair, Mr. Doolittle, yes, in my, that was just our staff suggested, I guess. That was how we had it mapped out in our head. The board is at complete liberty, or the board has the prerogative. You may structure this process in whatever way you see fit. And if there are specifics of how, beyond kind of what I sketched out, that the board wants to see, then that can go in the resolution. The resolution can really be a roadmap for how this process wants to go forward. So if the board feels that it would be better for the advisory committees to submit their input via a different mechanism, submitting it directly to the policy board chair or by some other means, and yes, absolutely, we can do it that way.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
So I guess just to be clear, I appreciate the comment, but just to be clear, I sit on several committees. And then as a district engineer, I represent 300 employees. And so the way it typically works for us is before the meeting, I approach my 300 employees and I say, do you have input to this? And so I think, in my perspective, I think it would be better if whichever one we decide to do, if the chair is included from TAC, for instance, he approaches his group before the committee meeting and says, what is your input? And then he brings that. I've just had experiences where I sit on a committee, policies and procedures, we make decisions, and then when I take it down to my 300 employees for comment, it's digressive. And then we tend to start all over again. So that's just something to think about. I certainly appreciate the process. I like this summary. I think it gives us some very good things to think about. But I would be a proponent of coming forward with comments before the committee meets, not the other way around. Just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Bencomo?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for that feedback. I'm curious, Andrew, what do you expect this process to, do you think the bylaws need a lot of rework? What are your expectations?
Madam Chair, Councilor Bencomo, in my opinion, the bylaws need a lot of work. I think I speak that there's a consensus of staff that the bylaws need a lot of work. So we're anticipating just, again, kind of the scenario that we had sketched out in our head, so this should by no means be interpreted as tying the hands of the board. My hope was that the subcommittee would meet initially to have one fairly intensive meeting, and it would be a fairly intensive meeting where staff makes our proposals, those are hashed out. Any other input that the members of the subcommittee have, all that's worked together. My hope, naive as it may be, that might only take that one meeting to kind of get that consensus built as to what needs to go in the document. Now, while I say that, I am anticipating that first meeting is going to be big and it's going to be long. But my hope is that once we get that first meeting done, staff will then go back, take those comments on board, and then hopefully we would only need one second meeting of the subcommittee in order to, I guess, get the seal of approval to the subcommittee that this is an acceptable draft to move forward to whatever it is that the rest of the process is crafted to be.
Andrew?
Yes, ma'am.
It's my experience, particularly with things like bylaws, that the more people involved, the slower and the less work that will get done. And I very much specifically say with things like bylaws. And so, I'm curious if there's a 2-1-1 option, right? So the 3 chairs plus the NMDOT representative. I just feel like, and I just want to say that I really appreciate staff's consideration on making sure that this process is inclusive, that it includes as many voices as possible in this process in order to get everybody's feedback. But I agree with Mr. Doolittle that it should work the down up, right, as opposed to the committee does this, it goes back to a bunch of people and it needs to get completely reworked. I don't necessarily think the 3, this board and the subcommittees are completely unaligned or looking for very different things. That could be your analysis, I don't know. I just don't think that something like the bylaws hopefully would be as divisive or controversial for all 3 committees. So I really do think that the bigger this gets, the longer we'll actually have a product.
Thank you for that, Councilor Bencomo. I appreciate those sentiments and how you express that. And if that's the will of the board, and I totally understand and sympathize with wanting to keep the subcommittee small. I mean, that would be my preference. The reason why staff prefers having the input of the advisory committees is because one of the advisory committees in particular is going to be directly impacted by our proposals the most. And there may very well be controversy. There may very well be significant pushback and angst and dissatisfaction. And I mean, we're going to make the suggestions that we're going to make. And if they get shot down as being whatever, irrational or whatever, as unworkable, then that's fine. But we still have some things that we see that we need to have done that we are going to bring forward as part of this process. And we are anticipating some degree of pushback on that. Now, from the standpoint of what you alluded to, yes, absolutely, the policy committee is sovereign. So they don't need to consult with the advisory committees on this if they don't want to. That's a choice that the policy board will make well, now, I guess, because I need direction about how to write this resolution, but ultimately via that resolution as to how that process is going to be set up. But there are going to be a couple things where I don't think that all the committees are going to be seeing eye to eye on. And there is definitely going to be some provision for controversy. And I guess to kind of spell it out just a little bit, as far as committee discipline, committee membership, these are kind of some of the touchy things that do need to be looked at as part of this process. And my analysis is I do think there's going to be some dissension and disagreement about those things.
Thanks, Andrew. And I mean, yes, I certainly have an opinion about how this should look, but I also want to, I trust that what staff is saying. We prefer.
Now, I mean, we don't have it here, but we could do a 4-1-1 and just have the chairs of the advisory committees be present for the subcommittee and get the input and feedback that way. I mean,
you presented really thoughtful options, Andrew, so I don't want to throw another one out.
No, by all means, throw another one out there.
If staff is comfortable, if staff is most comfortable and thinks the 4-2-2 is the most effective and inclusive and all of that, then I will support that.
Councilor Graham?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm new to this committee, obviously, but I am not new to nightmarish group writing projects. And luckily, Mr. Doolittle and Councilor Bencomo have both said a lot of what was already in my heart. I defer to staff's discretion on this. You've been to this rodeo before.
Actually, I haven't. This is, for this particular process, this is brand new for me, too.
I wouldn't have admitted that because you sounded like very confident. But no, I agree. I'm comfortable with the 4-2-2 if staff feels that's the best way to go with the provisions that Mr. Doolittle and Councilor Bencomo mentioned along the lines, absolutely inclusion is great. I think the 4-2-2 represents that in getting some of the subcommittees in. But in personal experience, presenting, we bring to the larger group, like here are some parameters in which we're going to work. Otherwise, it's an endless, frustrating fight. So, not to be pessimistic, but yeah.
Well, I think a clear-sighted recognition of the potential challenges that lie ahead of us is going to be more helpful than trying to pretend like it's going to be easy.
That was far more elegant than I could have said. So chalk me up for 4-2-2 and let me know how I can help.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Corn, any questions, comments?
I don't have enough insight about what I sort of defer to y'all's recommendation and the idea that it's going to be a bear of a task, but I also want to just sort of acknowledge the potential. I do think that the idea of representation of jurisdictions, I think sometimes I could acknowledge that the city might have an outsized sort of voice in some of these things, and so I do think that it's really important to sort of balance that with the collective needs and making sure that those are well represented and well articulated and at the table. And so I don't want to pile on to that possibility. So I appreciate your thoughtfulness around that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. And I want to get some thoughts from Chair Sanchez, but I do think that we definitely, the advisory chairs need to go to their committees, as Mr. Doolittle mentioned, and get some input from them. Let me turn it over to Chair Sanchez for his thoughts.
No, Madam Chair, I think exactly what you're saying was kind of the intent, and I think hopefully to address some of the concerns with the subcommittees. It wasn't necessarily trying to, the hope was by having when we discussed this between myself and Andrew, was by having the chair and vice chair of the subcommittees, was that if they possibly could buy in and be supportive of where the bylaws could go, or where, you know, at least the draft of them, they could essentially be advocates for their committees, and vice versa. I think bringing in those subcommittees' input into that development or revision to the bylaws, so that way we would have hopefully minimal resistance going through the subcommittees and getting their approval. So that was kind of why, you know, in the discussion of trying to involve the chair and vice chair of the subcommittees, it was definitely not to try to get too many people, because recognizing absolutely when you get more people involved, it can create more opportunities for dissension or varying points of view. And so we were just trying to figure out, I felt like that could be the best way in which to have advocates going into the subcommittees and minimizing, you know, any type of issues we might have. So, but I really appreciate the feedback from the board members, because as Andrew said, this was just something we decided to, you know, have some thoughts coming into this meeting on where we thought we could possibly have some in developing a committee for the bylaws to develop it. But, you know, this is really, you know, having the input from the board was really important to understand, just from everybody's experience, what might be the best way, because I think this will be my first opportunity to affect the bylaws directly in any of the committees since I've been serving on the county commission or any of our committees. So this is going to be a new opportunity for me myself.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, and I think, too, something that you touched on, I heard, was that we do need to establish, if we do go with the 422, that we do need to establish the parameters so that this does not become a long, drawn-out process, and because we certainly don't want that. No. So Councilor Graham had suggested the 422. I believe Chair Sanchez, you suggested the 422 as well. Thank you. Consensus?
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Consensus.
As a follow-up, unfortunately, we're not done with this topic quite yet. The next item that we would need is, and I don't have a preference on this, honestly. I have very mixed feelings, very ambivalent. I see the upside of both and I see the downside of both. But I think probably the policy board should make it clear to the subcommittee their expectations as to internally to the subcommittee how this should go forward. And I'm specifically thinking about, is this going to be a voting subcommittee? Is this a committee where the subcommittee will be expected to take an active vote at the end of their process to vote to submit the draft to the board for consideration? Or is this going to be more like how the JPA subcommittee worked, where it was kind of, I mean, it worked very well, but it was a much smaller group, but it was really kind of a roll-up-your-sleeves working group. I see the advantages to both sides, because obviously, if you increase the formality, you're increasing the turgidity of the process. But at the same time, if there is a lot of controversy, you might not be able to get to a full consensus, and so you might need to have the opportunity to say, nope, this is what the majority of the subcommittee wants, this is what we're going to proceed forward with. I don't endorse either one of these ideas. I honestly, I don't know which is going to be better with regard to this particular committee. I did speak with, again, CLC Legal is our attorney. I did speak with them about this topic, specifically with regard to Open Meetings Act compliance and the need for minutes and things like that. And their guidance to me was that as long as we avoid a quorum of any existing governing agency or anything like that, which none of these proposals get anything close to that, we're good as far as Open Meetings Act compliance. So these can be closed meetings, well, private meetings, I guess is probably a better technical term for it. These can be private meetings, and we don't need to take minutes for them. Basically, the minutes will be the draft at the end. But as far as whether or not this committee should vote the city attorney's office was like, whatever it is that you guys end up wanting to do. So I did want to share that with the board, that I don't have a preference. I don't know which would be better. It's something maybe we just need to think about and then rewrite the resolution at the April meeting to reflect what everyone's consensus is. But that is, excuse me, something that I have been thinking about how internally this should proceed. Lastly, I would like to tentatively request from the jurisdictions, obviously Mr. Doolittle, I presume, is going to be the one from NMDOT. Do the jurisdictions have a nominee for the subcommittee from the board, from the town, the county, and the city as to who I could pencil in for the resolution for April? And I mean, we don't need to make the decision today, but since we're all here in an open meeting right now, I thought the least I could do is ask. I mean, obviously I can follow up with each jurisdictional delegation one-on-one later on, but I thought I would at least ask the question now, since this is the last time that we'll meet before I'll need to present the resolution.
Okay.
Wait, I'm sorry, can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, I'm unclear then, Andrew, about, you're asking for one person from this board, or you're asking for each of jurisdiction?
I'm asking for a city councilor, a town trustee, and a county commissioner, and either the district engineer or designee from this board. So 4 people from this board.
Wow, I'm very much not understanding the makeup of the 422.
The 422 will be the composition that I just laid out: city councilor, county commissioner, town trustee, district engineer, and then chair and vice chair from the TAC, and chair and vice chair from the BPAC. So 8 people in total.
Okay, thank you. Wow, that's not what I had in mind. Thank you.
Obviously, I didn't explain it well.
Yeah. I'm wondering if we need to do just a generic resolution saying that each jurisdiction will be represented. I mean, I'll need to talk to the mayor to see if she's willing to participate or if she wants me to. I don't know about my fellow counselors or about Commissioner Sanchez. I'm kind of thinking Commissioner Sanchez would like to participate for the county, but again, I don't know.
Madam Chair, with regards to a generic resolution, I mean, I guess that could be done, but that would be outside the recommendations of Robert's Rules of Order for a subcommittee of this nature. The usual practice per Robert's Rules of Order is for a subcommittee, the individuals need to be identified who are explicitly going to be serving is the practice.
So we have Trent.
And again, we don't need to decide today, but I did, since we're in an open meeting right now, I wanted to ask the question.
Okay. Because we have till April, so let me touch base with the mayor for the town of Mesilla. And then my fellow counselors,
Well, all volunteers, please take one step forward.
Thank you, Counselor Graham.
Madam Chair.
There you go. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
So yes, I have been waived off to be the city representative.
You didn't step backwards fast enough is what it was.
No, I did say that I would do it, and my fellow council members very quickly agreed, so.
Thank you, Counselor Graham. I'll, like I said, touch base with the mayor. Chair Sanchez?
Yeah, I'll throw my name in the hat for the county. I'd like to be considered. If for any reason it changes, I'll let you know, Andrew, but you can have my name for that.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Sanchez. And I know the mayor participated on the JPA, so I'm kind of thinking she might want to participate in the bylaws, but that could change, so like I said, I'll let you know.
Okay, I will follow up with the entire town delegation. Oh, which does remind me, out of sequence, but I guess I do need to inform the board. I should have said this at the beginning of the meeting. I apologize. We do have a new board member. Trustee Garcia is no longer on the policy board. Trustee Adriana Merrick is now the third representative from the town of Mesilla. But I will follow up with the entirety of the town delegation, I guess, next week, something like that.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Yes, and we had a shift of assignments, so thank you for bringing that up. Okay.
And finally, Madam Chair, after me talking for nearly 40 minutes, we are now concluded with this agenda item unless anybody else has any questions.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
just one quick question. So you had asked whether we were going to be a voting committee or non. Do we need to provide input to that now, or is that something
Oh,
we'll
yes, I
discuss
had
later?
forgotten. Thank you,
I
Mr.
forgot that
Doolittle.
too.
If I may, Madam Chair, can I
Yes.
throw in my 2 cents? So I sat in on the JPA. I also sit in on the executive committee with the El Paso MPO, and they are a voting member they are a voting committee who does these kinds of things. I actually feel that with our smaller group, I felt the JPA discussion was very successful. I think we resolved a lot of things. My recommendation was we move forward with an informal committee with no formal voting. I just think it was successful. I think Andrew's right. There's going to be some things that may become, not knowing he's going to bring to the committee, that they may become
The chair knows he's smiling. I can see him.
so there may be some things that we can't reach consensus on, but I think that even through the JPA, there's some very good, honest dialogue. And then ultimately, I think Andrew's right. This board is the one who's going to make the final decision. So if the recommendations come to us, whether they're consensus or not through the subcommittee, just my recommendation is a non-voting subcommittee.
Okay. Then
think we have consensus.
basically, I guess non-voting would be, we would just not say anything about that in the resolution whatsoever. So
Right.
I'll be silent on that one. All right.
Thank you for bringing that up, Mr. Doolittle. I had spaced that off when we were assigning people. All right. Anything else on this?
No, Madam Chair, I am finally done.
Okay. All right. 7.4, MPO 101 training.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am very pleased to be able to introduce Mr. Dominic Loya, who's going to give this presentation.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the Policy Board. So today we will be talking about the basics of the MPO. So metropolitan planning organizations are federally mandated for any any metropolitan area with a population over 50,000. So there are two basic types. We have large MPOs, which are 200,000 and above, and then we have small MPOs, which is what we are, that are 50,000 to 199,999. So there are 5 MPOs in the state of New Mexico. El Paso and Mid-Region are both large MPOs. Mid-Region is also known as Mr. Cog. And then we have 3 small MPOs, Farmington, Mesilla Valley, and Santa Fe. So TMAs, they do have, or transportation management areas, by virtue of having over 200,000, the difference is they actually have some implementation authority. So we have the smaller MPOs, the process we just went through for the Joint Powers Agreement. This is how they're created. They determine the roles of the MPO and staff in the transportation plan area, also the financial responsibilities, and federal law does give more definitions and structure of TMAs. So we were required to have bylaws, as we just discussed, so we were going through a bylaws revision. And it is supposed to be every time that the JPA is updated. So then there's also the NMDOT. There are 3-year cooperative agreements with them with each MPO. And the terms of these establish the financial grant to each MPO. And I believe we will be going through that this year.
Yes, we will be redoing the cooperative agreement with NMDOT this year.
And then MPO staff generally interacts with the NMDOT liaison on most issues related with NMDOT and the Federal Highway Administration. So, being an MPO, we have required work products. So we have a public participation plan that is every 5 years. It's in conjunction with the MTP. We will actually be bringing this next year, will be the 5 years for it, and it will be brought before this board next year to update, because we will be beginning the MTP process again. There's a Title VI plan, which is every 3 years, and that was brought before this board last year. We have the Unified Planning Work Program, the UPWP. It's every 2 years. We will also be bringing that before this board this year. Then we have the MTP, the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. It's every 5 years. The last one was in 2020. So we will begin work on this again in 2023. And then every year we have the annual listing of obligated projects. So these are all the projects that the MPO completed during that year. And then we have the APR, which is the Annual Performance and Expenditure Report, which is basically the financials of the MPO. So the public participation plan defines how we will conduct public involvement activities. The goal is to be transparent, predictable in the planning process, and equitable. These are all required by federal law. It must be adopted and updated before any MTP process is taken. And then, as I said, the next one will be next year. We also have the Title VI plan, which is from the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It assures that it's an assurance to the U.S. Department of Transportation that we are not excluding anybody in the planning process. It also details a complaint process if there are Title VI violations. And then it's updated every 3 years now, and the last update was last year in 2021. The Unified Planning Work Program is the biannual document that outlines transportation planning activities to be conducted by MPO staff or those that MPO staff will oversee, as well as participate in without oversee. And it has to be consistent with the MTP. This includes call for projects, such as federal, which we went through last year with the Recreational Trails Program, the Transportation Alternatives Program, and Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Act. And then the state, which we are basically going through right now with the Transportation Project Fund. So on these, with the Recreational Trails Program, we haven't had any actual applications for that in the last few years. It's been mostly a Transportation Alternatives Program. For those, we've gotten the Walnut Street Improvement Project, the Elks Drive Trail Project, Las Cruces Lateral Project, and the Safe Routes to School Coordinator is funded through this. And then the Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Act, when they opened those up, this year we had NMDOT put in an application for more funding for the University Avenue project. The Transportation Project Fund from the state, the town of Mesilla received funds for the La Llorona Trail Extension down Calle del Norte. The current UPWP that we are under went into effect October 1st of 2020. The Transportation Improvement Program, the TIP. So this is a list of all federally funded projects that are regionally significant within the MPO area. So these are the big projects. So completed this last year, NMDOT has completed University and the I-25 interchange, as well as Valley Drive from Picacho Avenue to Avenida de Mesilla. We have ongoing ones, which are the US 70 maintenance that Trent talks about. We have just in general maintenance projects. The I-25 corridor study is currently going on, as well as the Elks Drive Trail. So then there's also future projects. So the next 5 years, we're looking at University Avenue Multimodal Project that should be hopefully kicking off next year. We've got the Roadrunner Transit Maintenance and Operations Center, Dripping Springs Roadway Improvements, US 70 Rehabilitation, the next phase, which is the phase that Mr. Doolittle was talking about earlier. And then the 5+ year projects, these are further out. These are things like Arrowhead Interchange, I-10 bridge replacements, Mesa Grande extensions, and then the I-10 rehabilitation project. The current TIP went into effect on October 1st, 2021. MTPs are long-range transportation plans covering a minimum of 20-year planning horizon. Federal law requires us to update them every 5 years and has to be consistent with federal transportation law and the applicable sections of law. It needs to identify facilities that function as an integrated transportation network and emphasize those facilities that serve national and regional transportation functions. Then it needs to consider the 10 planning factors as they relate to the 20-year planning horizon, and then describes how the performance measures and performance targets are used in the MTP to assess the transportation system. It also includes a system of performance reporting and evaluation of the condition and performance of the transportation system with respect to the performance targets. The safety targets are brought every year. And then this year we will be bringing the bridge and roadway safety targets, or the targets. Those are every 2 years for, I'm sorry, I lost a word.
Performance measures.
Performance measures. These also include strategies to enhance transportation and transit and incorporate the financial plans and demonstration of how the MTP can be implemented, indicating the source and necessary funds to carry out the project in the MTP and recommending additional financial strategies to support implementation. Then it also must include financial strategies dedicated to maintaining not only existing infrastructure, but also for projected future infrastructure. And we must examine the implementation of environmental mitigation activities. Scenario planning, while not required by federal law, is strongly encouraged by both FHWA and MDOT. And then we need to also include in this the Federal Transit Administration and transit planning for the future of the region. And then also FHWA and MDOT encourage MPOs to address emerging issues. And emerging issues can be anything from crashes to anything such as self-driving cars. So it covers a wide range. So the currently adopted MTP for the Mississippi Valley MPO is Mobility 2045. And it was brought before this board on July 15th of 2020. And the next will need to be adopted by June of 2025. So the MPO does not own or maintain facilities. And the role of policy board here is the rudder to guide regional transportation planning. Action or inaction by the policy board has significant regional transportation consequences. So the purpose of the MPO 101 book, which you received, is a quick reference manual on MPO-related documents, materials for all members of the MPO committees and MPO staff. We'll happily provide any updates to the books. Please just let us know, and I'll now stand for comments or questions.
Thank you, Mr. Loya. Questions, comments? No, you're good? Sorry. Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Loya.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. 7.5, Mr. Doolittle.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Kind of snuck up on me. Nothing much has changed from last month. We continue to work on the project on New Mexico 404. And then, of course, our full reconstruction project out by Hatch. The one that you all will start seeing at the end of the month is we're going to start the pavement preservation just north of town on I-25 in the Radium Springs area. That one's tentatively scheduled to start February 28th. Schedule for that one is showing 160 working days, which is about 8 months. Typically, they don't last that long, but with it starting in February, we give them some time for weather and those kinds of things. The other one that I know Commissioner Sanchez is concerned about specifically is the I-25 corridor study. Our consultant is still reviewing the comments that we submitted in the draft Phase AB, so I don't have a final yet. So the timelines, Commissioner, that I gave you in the Doñana County community meeting, I'm still waiting on specific dates. I did request 2 separate meetings, but at this point, I don't really have an update on that. They're having to review some data at the intersections and those kinds of things that weren't originally included in the Phase AB. So as soon as I get an update on that, I'll let you all know. But outside of that, the session seems to be moving well for the department. There's going to be a lot of money, as I mentioned last month. Make sure you all are working with your respective staffs to make sure your local government applications, shovel-ready projects, those kinds of things are ready to go. There's going to be a substantial amount of local government money. And the matches this year are going to be 5% on some of those funding categories as opposed to the 20% that we've seen in the past. So it's going to be very competitive. Outside of that, Madam Chair, I don't have anything else, but I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Doolittle. Questions, comments? All right, thank you. All right. Any board member updates? Moving right along. No board member updates? I'll turn it over to.
Madam
Yes,
Chair,
yes. Oh, yes, sorry.
Commissioner Sanchez.
Yes.
No worries. I just wanted to say thank you for stepping in to chair the meeting here last minute. And apologies that I'm not there in person. So, but just want to say thank you so much for stepping in. Like I said, here last minute.
Oh, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. Thank you, Commissioner Sanchez. All right.
Madam Chair, one quick question. I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but I was just a little bit curious, given the discussion I had with Franklin and Andrew on the presentation. So the El Paso MPO, and I know they're out of Texas, but they allow virtual participation. Right now, the legislative session is taking place. They're allowing virtual voting. They're allowing virtual presentations. I'm just curious why, or what the interpretation is from our legal counsel, why we can't even have virtual presentations. Just curious for my own
That
sense
thought
of,
crossed my mind too, yeah.
not to put you on the spot, Andrew.
Thanks.
And maybe this isn't the place, but maybe something
Well,
just to look into.
I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads even from the city councilors, so I think perhaps maybe I should go into it. This is Andrew Ray for the record. The interpretation, and I don't actually completely understand it myself. If the committee will indulge me, I actually have my email open because I was working on something else. I'm going to go over to the other microphone so I can pull up the email thread that I had yesterday so I can kind of more accurately, rather than just doing it by memory.
And Madam Chair, and if Andrew, if you wouldn't mind, if I could provide at least some context, or at
Please
least
do.
from what I understand, is that the concern is around the Open Meetings Act, and I don't have it here in front of me directly, but it seems to indicate that whenever you hold a meeting, that there is an allowance for, and I think this goes for our bylaws, not in the Open Meetings Act, that allows for us to, those board members, to, when we can't attend in person, can attend via telephone or, some other remote method. But the Open Meetings Act has specific wording that says that there is an allowance for telephonic participation or of similar technology. And it seems that from the initial conversations or some of the messages that I've seen recently within the past week, and Andrew can probably, I think has had his own communications as well, is that it seems like where it seems to be getting stuck is that it's saying telephonically, and that I don't know if the interpretation is that it literally has to be only telephone and not virtual because of the way it's written in the Open Meetings Act. I know in the county, we've interpreted that where it says other similar technology, allowing for other media such as this as WebEx, Zoom, or Teams. And that's similar technology as to what we're allowed to do, at least per the Open Meetings Act. But I think there's just something around the interpretation that seems to be holding things up. Excuse me.
Madam Chair, if Commissioner Sanchez was done, there is a legal interpretation from the city attorney's, the city legal department, that it is not allowable to do the hybrid format. Now, we're at the county right now, obviously. And this question was raised by Commissioner Sanchez, is like, why couldn't we do it here when we're at the county? Problem is, as I've alluded to a couple times in the meeting today, the city, though, is our attorney. So if, for whatever reason, somebody raised some kind of complaint, and it was found that I had deliberately disregarded the advice of our legal counsel, that would be grounds for my dismissal. So I can't countenance that. The basis of the legal interpretation, I'm not clear on, other than the fact that they do not agree with the interpretation of the county's legal team, that the city believes that it is not acceptable under the Open Meetings Act to allow the hybrid format. And I know from my own personal experience that this is being enforced because, I'll just cite the example. When ATG, who did the short-range transit plan for the city of Las Cruces, last year, they made a request to do a virtual presentation to the city council before the short-range transit plan came to the city council for action. They requested to do a virtual presentation, and that was denied by the city. The people from ATG had to come in person from Austin. They had to physically be there. So I know that that is the city's interpretation. I know that they are enforcing that. As far as the ins and outs, why, I haven't actually sat down with the attorneys to find out. I've been more having conversations on the technical end with city PIO, and it's my understanding that there are some issues there. I do have some references to concerns also from the city clerk's office that they are not comfortable with trying to do virtual presentations because of potential problems with the internet, with the software that are outside of the actual control of the city of Las Cruces, and that is a concern as well. So I don't know what the nexus is, how all of this, it feeds into each other, and what is the decisive factor in all of this, but that's as much as I'm going to be able to say, really, about why we are where we are. And I know that we're working on it, really, I guess, is also what I can add. But that's the best explanation, inadequate as it is, that I'm able to offer on this topic.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
So I don't bring this up to cause problems. I'm not real familiar with Robert's Rules of Orders and Opens Meetings Acts and those kinds of things. It's just a few things have come up recently. Like I've been sitting on Senate Finance and House Trans, and all of them are virtual, and they are actually voting virtually. We are presenting as a department virtually, and I'm assuming that same law applies to the Attorney General as it does to the City of Las Cruces. And so I was just curious, because when I talked to Franklin last week, they were prepared to present today from Santa Fe, but because of the legislative session. And I'm just thinking, come April, if the general office staff gets COVID, for instance, or they become sick, now we're pushing that another week. And I think given the situation that we're in with the technology that we have and the advancements that we've made, especially over the last 18 months or 24 months with this pandemic, it was just my mind wondering why. So I don't know if it's worth looking into, if the board is okay with the way we're handling things, but I was just curious more than anything. Thank you for the time, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Counselor.
I can commit to talking to our legal department and getting a better sense of the situation. I think particularly given that the legislature has a virtual option, I can, commit to talking to the legal department and then bringing back some sort of response.
Madam Chair, Councilor Bencomo, Mr. Doolittle, and Commissioner Sanchez, we are actively, Commissioner Sanchez and I are actively in talks right now. Not in any way to discourage you, please. It'll be helpful. But just to assure the board, we are in talks about this. I'm a little reticent to want to say this, but I will. I mean, this was something that Councilor Vasquez, when he was chair last year, tried to address and was not successful. We are working on it. But again, by all means, any assistance on this dialogue could potentially be helpful. And yeah, that's probably more than enough for me.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
Commissioner Sanchez.
yes.
I just want to add one last comment, which is I think the intent, or at least the spirit of the Open Meetings Act, is to ensure that members of the public that would attend a public board meeting are able to participate or not participate, but at least view the proceedings. And I think, that's one of the things that I think we are doing. And I know for you in the chambers and anybody in the chambers, they can see if somebody's online, they can actually see, you hear who is actually providing the comment and the interpret and in this case my votes. But I think it's something that I think where Trent had said, I believe it was that or Councilor Bencomo that had just said, where we've come in the last 18 months with technology, members of the public that are there in person can also see those and identify those who are participating remotely. And I think that's the most important thing, is that they're not shut out. And by allowing for virtual meetings and you have this method, they can still participate, and there's nothing that's necessarily hidden from them, whether this is televised or just in the chambers. But like I said, I think in the end, the technology still meets the intent of Open Meetings Act. It just isn't specifically called out, and I don't know if that might be where the concern is. But I think, as mentioned, the legislature, I know, as in the county, and there's probably many other government entities that are doing something similar, that where their interpretation of their legal counsel seems to agree that this is allowed so long as we meet the requirements of the Open Meetings Act. So, I don't know. Like I said, that's something that I would love to try to address, just so that in a case like this, where we have somebody from Santa Fe that cannot come down and address the board, we have other options to make it available. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Sanchez, and thank you for participating remotely today. So appreciate it, taking the time. I hope you feel better, too. All right. Andrew, staff updates?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Andrew Ray for the record. I'm very pleased to say that we will have our Associate Transportation Planner on board starting on Monday. I had hoped that she was going to be able to be here today, but that didn't pan out. But she does have a start date. She will be here on Monday. And as Mr. Doolittle alluded to, we do have an ongoing call for projects for the Transportation Project Fund going on through the MPO right now. I do not, in fact, have a total dollar amount that is available. I contacted Clarissa Martinez at the state of New Mexico, who's kind of the person in charge of liaising for all of this, and she didn't even know what the dollar amount in total was, but that there is no minimum project dollar amount. So basically, a jurisdiction can apply for, as long as it meets the criteria, which are very broadly written this year, which is a good thing. As long as it meets the criteria, there's no funding threshold or anything like that. You can apply for anything that you want. We do have, actually, I'm going to have to turn to Mr. Loya because I don't remember the dates off the top of my head. What are the due dates for project submission to MPO staff?
The due dates will be April 1st, because we will be bringing it through the committee process after that, and that'll give us a couple of weeks to meet with Trent staff to be able to get the project feasibility forms filled out by his staff. So it'll be April 1st when we need projects.
And that concludes staff updates, Madam Chair.
All right. Thank you very much. With that, it looks like we are ready for adjournment. Can I get a motion and a second to adjourn?
So moved, Graham.
Second, Bencomo.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your participation. We are adjourned. Thank you, staff. Thank you, Andrew.